Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Film Focus, episode 185, the top 10 films of 2024. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen of the North, South, East and West, and welcome to another episode of Film Focus. I'm your host, the Hybertsonic55, and I'm glad that you decided to join me once again for some film-related discussion. And it's January, we're in the new year, it's 2025, and I have to say a belated Happy New Year to everybody. Hope you had a good time during Christmas and had a nice, safe transition into the new year. But before we get to talk about upcoming films and all the most anticipated things I'm wanted to share with you, we have to go back to last year because we still have a top 10 that I haven't shared with you yet. Now, unfortunately, just due to work schedule conflicts, life, and working on another podcast at the same time, I just wasn't able to get you my top 10 list done. But I have it here ready for you now, so hopefully you'll enjoy. I will admit that I didn't get to see nearly as many films as I would have liked in 2024. My local cinema just was not showing nearly as many things as I would have liked, and to have to run out of town to go to London or a few other places to see some of these films, especially with my work schedule during the summer, was just nigh impossible. And even when December comes around, that's my month to try and do some catching up with films I haven't seen yet. I didn't get to see nothing. So certain films I really was interested in, like the Superman documentary with Christopher Reeve, or The Substance, or a few other films here and there, didn't get to see them. And I am livid about it, I really am. But my top 10, I would say, for the most part, is a good representation of what I liked last year. I will admit that a few of the latter entries, towards like 10 or 9, they could be shuffled about. I think even the 10th entry, I have dilly-dallied about what I really want to put in there, so yeah, there is that. Okay, so before we get into the top 10 itself, I just want to mention some of the films that just missed the top 10. Firstly, there's Transformers 1, a film that I think was betrayed by its marketing, but ended up being a much better film than I expected. The relationship between Optimus Prime and Megatron was pretty good. I really liked the visuals, and again, there was just so much more depth to this movie than I expected. I had a good time with it, and it's just a shame that it didn't get more exposure when it was out during its theatrical run. Alien Romulus is also a film that I am very, very half and half with. On one hand, it has some of the cleanest, nicest visuals I've seen in a sci-fi film for a while. It clearly knows how to bring that sort of tension and fear and brings the good vibes from the first two Alien films. It adheres to certain interesting parts of lore, and there's some cool revelations in the way in which they mess around with and do some cool things with the aliens, and putting the characters in scenarios that we haven't seen before was nice. I thought David Johnson and Kaylee Spaney did a good job as the two main people in the film. And I had fun with it, but at times there was just too many references to previous stuff, at some strange retcons, an insert of a character that I'm not sure needed to be there given who it was played by, and certain lines of dialogue that just really mess with continuity. And just there's moments in that film where you're just like, oh, you didn't need to do that. You were so close to perfection. That's the best way for me to describe it. Fede Alvarez did a great job of bringing the good vibes back to the Alien franchise, and I would say this is easily the best entry that this series has had for years. But the problem is there's just too many moments where it's like too many winks and nods and references to the franchise in ways that just make no sense. So yeah, that's why it's not in the top 10. Twisters was another film where I was just like, I don't really care for any sort of sequel to the original or reimagine or whatever you want to call it. But this film eventually won me over. I thought it was pretty fun. The cast was good. The scenarios were pretty exciting and thrilling. And I just had a good time with it. So yeah, if you haven't seen Twisters, give it a shot. And then there was Longlegs as well. I quite like the atmosphere of this film. Just that disturbing, awkward nature where something's happening, but you don't know what and how and why. But the vibes were good. I quite liked the acting. And yeah, again, it was a solid film. just didn't quite meet my top 10. And then there's A Quiet Place Day One, another film in the Quiet Place series, and I thought this one had some pretty interesting ideas, especially when it came to the setting, the character who it was centering on, played by Lupita Nyong'o, and seeing her relationship with Joseph Quinn as they tried to navigate the streets of the big city when the aliens first dropped and started causing chaos was pretty interesting. I thought it had an interesting angle, but unfortunately this comes as the third entry in the series, so it wasn't nearly as intense or scary as I would have liked, but it had some cool character material, so that made it worth watching. And then there was Furiosa. Now, I was curious about this for a while. I was obviously looking forward to what would be the next entry of the Mad Max series, and I knew that they were working on a sequel that eventually reverberated backwards into this prequel idea. And I think Anya Taylor-Joy did a pretty good job, and there was some pretty good stuff done with Chris Hemsworth as well. Some cool visuals and some interesting ideas of expanding the lore and world of the Mad Max universe and Furiosa's story. I just didn't find the film nearly as compelling as certain other people did. And yeah, I mean, it was still worth watching. I just found it a little bloated. Alright, and now it's time to talk about the top 10 itself. Be aware that some of these entries did not get a dedicated episode, so I may end up talking about them just a bit more than I would have usually. But yeah, starting out with number 10, it is Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, Deadpool and Wolverine is one of those films that I was very, very curious about for a while, just because they were bringing back Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and I was very curious to see what kind of shenanigans they were going to do, because obviously this was Deadpool coming into the MCU, utilizing the multiverse idea, and there were rumors for ages about who would be in it, who wouldn't be in it, and what kind of story they were telling. And it was very difficult to try and stay off of the internet when this film was being documented about prior to its July release. I eventually ended up seeing it, and you know what, the film ended up being a fair bit of fun. It was strange, nonsensical, full of all sorts of Easter eggs and winks and nods to previous material from the past Marvel films. And the humor, as usual for me, is hit and miss, but when it hit, it was good, but when it missed, it was also not so good. I like the costuming, some of the action sequences were pretty kick-ass. Hugh Jackman is always fun to watch him play, as Logan/Wolverine. And Ryan Reynolds is just doing his Ryan Reynolds thing as Deadpool, which again can either work or sometimes not work. The funny thing about Deadpool and Wolverine is that it did exactly what it said it would do on the tin. It was restrained in the amount of cameos and stuff that I thought they were going to do with the film, but at the same time, when it came to the story, I found it okay / unsatisfactory. I don't know. With Deadpool and Wolverine, as time went on after I saw it the second time, I found myself just thinking, you know what? I'm not sure how much I actually like this movie. I mean, its highs were very high, and I'm sure if I watched it again, I would still have fun with it. And there were certain elements that did make me just smile with glee, especially from a nostalgic point of view. But as it stands, I'm just like, yeah, it is good. I just don't love it, So then moving on to entry number 9, we have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Another film I was very much anticipating for a while, because obviously coming off of the previous trilogy that ended in 2017 and having Wes Ball, the director of the Maze Runner films, tackle this project was very interesting, because obviously he's working on that new live action Zelda film with Nintendo and Sony. So this was a very interesting film to see how he would handle another franchise before moving into the next one. And I think he did a pretty admirable job, moving how many years into the future, focusing on a new bunch of apes and focusing on a new scenario that has like a new bad guy along with a human that looks like she can't talk but she actually can. And there's all sorts of cool and interesting ideas that are floating around in this film. I just think that character-wise, no one in this film has the kind of interesting levels or depths that we got with the previous entries. And while there are some fascinating and cool moments here and there, some moments for you to be amazed, for you to be emotional, it's difficult because, coming off of is it Caesar's trilogy, the emotional material, the character material, the story overall, it hits so hard. This one just doesn't come quite as close. but it has its own thing that's going on, and I'm still curious to see where this franchise goes in the future. And then at number 8, you have Bad Boys 4, also known as Ride or Die. This film was a surprise for me. I liked the last one, but I was thinking, oh, okay, we're getting into the fourth entry. I don't know how much fun we're going to have with this, but I feel like the directors, along with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, found a way to do more with the characters than I expected, especially with Martin Lawrence, who ended up having way more to do comedically and more physically to do. While there are some moments here and there where they did certain things with characters in the plot where I'm just like, I don't know if I would have done that, and this just felt like it was needed just to give certain characters a bit more to do or give them a bit more layers. Overall, I had a lot of fun with the film. The action was good, the humor was fun, and again, it's just, for some reason, it just tickled that right bone in my body when it comes to action stuff. Elaborate, silly, and fun. Alright, and at number 7 we have Inside Out 2, another film where I thought, okay, they're doing a sequel to one of their most notable films. This is just screaming of desperation. I am always skeptical when it comes to sequels to films that didn't really need them, where it felt like they were mostly self-contained, and while the door was obviously open for an Inside Out number 2, I just don't think it was necessary, but I was willing to give it a chance once the word of mouth came out. So I watched it, I think, around within a month after it came out here in the UK, and I ended up enjoying it way more than I thought I would. The way in which these crazy people at Pixar are able to depict the difficulties of growing up, the emotional complexities of the human mind, and create these sort of visual characteristics that make us do things in very unique scenarios, whether it's good, bad, or in between. It's very fascinating, and the way in which they depict anxiety and what happens with joy and sadness, it's crazy. Certain stuff in here was just so good, and again, the visual styles are good, the colors are really good, the music's nice, and it has some interesting themes and messages in there, all that good Pixar material. While I wouldn't say that it's like better than the first one, I do think it's a good companion piece and definitely worth watching. At number 6 we have Monkey Man, the film debut of Dev Patel. I was down for this film from the time the first trailer dropped, and it ended up being a really fun action thriller with a simple yet effective story, some really good violence, and just a really good vibe from the location, the characters that the main character meets, and again, it's just a really well made piece of material. I would say that the film felt like it, I wouldn't say meandered, but it felt a little slow at moments, and there was certain things that the film will come back to a few too many times where I was just like, this wasn't necessary, this is just taking up a bit of time. But I would highly recommend this film. It's just really solid, and I really hope to see more from Dev Patel in a directing role. And now we move on to entry number 5, which is Speak No Evil. Now, I have been down for this film since I saw the first trailer for it during the summer. I can't remember what film I saw. I think it might have been Longlegs, and I saw the trailer for this, and I just saw James McAvoy acting like some nutter, and I'm like, I'm in. There is something so interesting about watching actors or actresses just fully commit to a role and just be deranged, or just being really awkward or creepy, that just makes for a fascinating watch. And James McAvoy, he's proven to be one of the most versatile and interesting actors that have come out of the acting space for a while now. And obviously we got to see some interesting stuff of what he could do in Split back in 2016, but this one just allows him to just be as subtle yet aggressive and crazy, and the way that he can just switch on a dime, and all the little nuances of his physical performance, whether it's the little twitches in his face or how he can change his posture and his demeanor, is so interesting. The film is so fun and crazy and scary, and I know that it's a Western remake of another film that showed up, I think, within the last 2 years, which I've not seen the original. But as it stands for me, I had a good time with it. Me and my family were having a good time, as were so many other people in the cinema. It's just an interesting balance between being, afraid, but also, laughing your head off at the same time. And then at number 4, we have Sonic 3. Now, I think anyone who knows me knew that this is going to be in the top 5 in some way, shape, or form. And Sonic 3 for me was just so much fun. and I was so glad that it landed. Adapting the story of Sonic Adventure 2 was always going to be difficult, and I feel like Jeff Fowler, along with the writers and everybody else involved in this film, found a way to streamline, condense, and create a more approachable version of the story for general audiences. It continues all the interesting themes that were started in the previous two Sonic films about identity and purpose, family, and obviously in the sight of adversity, trying to make the right decisions. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles have never been better. The voice acting from Ben Schwartz, Colleen O'Shaughnessy, and Idris Elba is great. The introduction of Shadow is wonderful. Keanu Reeves did a good job. And obviously seeing Jim Carrey come back to play two different Eggmen was insane, which led to so many fun moments. But I will say that the film does have its faults. Some of that standard humor that I wasn't so keen on in the previous films is back here, and there are certain moments where there are some pretty dark elements that came from the games that I don't feel were as nicely translated into this film here. And there were certain moments where there was humor where it really required a little bit more seriousness. So it led to some tonal whiplash on a couple of occasions. And I do feel like, even though I appreciate how much they had to streamline the Adventure 2 story, there's certain darker elements or certain things that I feel like were missing from this film that would have given certain moments a little bit more emotional weight. Plus there were some cameos in the film that just didn't need to be there at all. But as it stands, Sonic 2 was really fun, the action scenes were insane, and the third act of the movie had so many crowd-pleasing moments for me, which made me feel so much joy. I haven't felt this kind of giddiness since I saw Spider-Man No Way Home, so it was a damn good time for me in that regard. Alright, and now we move on to entry number 3, which was Civil War from earlier this year. I'd been following this film for a while, because anytime Alex Garland makes something, I'm normally there to check it out. And while I didn't enjoy his film Men, I would say still I love Ex Machina and I really like Annihilation. And this one is another one of the I like these in his series of films. The film was so dark and grim, yet fascinating at the same time. Seeing this world of journalism from the eyes of a photographer along with a little crew, going in and out of locations in America during this portion of time where there's several different divided camps, and rather than taking a side, you basically just get to see all different camps and see their different opinions on is it where their opinions lie, and see some of these dangerous scenarios that the characters get into. And it's fascinating stuff. It's really cool. It's well acted, and the use of music in the film, whether it be the film score or certain licensed music in there, was solid. And again, the film looks so good, especially towards the latter side of the movie where you get to go to Washington DC. That stuff is impeccably shot. It looks so good. And at number 2 we have The Wild Robot. Now this is a film that I was very much interested in watching since I saw the first trailer back in July. And I've been following it ever since, and then when I finally got to see it in the cinema, it was delightful. It was everything that I had hoped it would be. Now I will admit that towards the middle/latter side of the film, there are certain character beats and plot elements where if you've seen any kind of films that are aimed at children, then you'll know exactly how these things will play out. However, I still feel like there is a lot of heart, sincerity, and emotion that you can get out of this that was just so genuinely and fun. And the film is entertaining in so many ways that I can't knock it too many points for that. I thought the characters were enchanting and really fun. I like the story. The visual design of the film is great. The color scheme was grand, and the painted sort of art style that they had going on with the entire film was so good. The voice work was great from the cast involved, and I just found myself super invested in it, and I was so happy by the time it was over. So yeah, if you haven't seen The Wild Robot, check it out. It was easily my favorite film of last year, animated wise. And then we come to film number 1. And honestly, I'm surprised, but at the same time not so much that anything has been able to top it. We are, of course, talking about Dune Part 2 from Denis Villeneuve. I love Dune Part 2. And I feel like it's a great companion piece to the previous film, as it just takes the foundation of the previous film but then elevates everything when it comes to the characters, the scope of everything, and you really get to dive deeper into the lore of the various different houses, the different planets, learn more about certain things that are going on in the background. learn about Paul Atreides, learn about like, the Fremen and like all of their beliefs, how there's like different sides to their clans, how they believe in like this savior, and how religion and corruption happens, and just so many things that have to be taken into consideration with this film that I don't even have the time to fully dive into right now. But I will say that, again, the world of Dune is so strange and weird and wonderful to me, where there's just so much cool things going on, and I feel like they did a great job of like building upon what happened before, but also taking things to new heights. I think they found a good way to elevate the characters, make them feel like they had a little bit more depth than they did before, and insert humor where it definitely wasn't present in the previous movie. And again, the visual spectacle of the film, along with the wonderful film score from Hans Zimmer, presented me with moments where I just found myself enchanted, completely immersed in the cinematic experience, to the point where I'm just like, this is the reason I get out of my house to go to the cinema, for moments like this. The sound design is insane, the scope of the film is insane, and seeing it in IMAX was fabulous. So yeah, nothing compared to that feeling, and that's why it's my number one pick for this year. So now I turn it over to you, ladies and gentlemen. What were your top 10 films of 2024? Did you like my entries? Did you dislike my entries? Let me know in the comment section below, or hit me up on Twitter where I'm at Hypersonic55. Check out the podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spotify, and other places where podcasts can be found. And be sure to come back to the podcast soon, as I'll have my top 10 most anticipated films of 2025. So thank you for listening as always, and until the next time, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out. Peace.